Thank you, Senator Seward. Senator Fawcett.
Thank you, Mr President. I spoke in this chamber on the 25th of March this year about persecution of religious minorities, and I talked at that time about the German International Society for Human Rights that had highlighted that 80% of all religious discrimination and vilification was in fact directed against Christians, which comes as a surprise to many people, particularly here in Australia, where Christians would tend to be regarded as the majority, and we don't expect those things. I also spoke about particularly the situation in Syria at the time, where minorities such as Druze and Christians were being persecuted in Syria in the middle of a very sectarian war. It was interesting to look at the response by journalists and media around the world, and whilst there were some people, particularly the BBC, who were starting to report on the issues faced by those minorities, it wasn't generally regarded as a big enough issue to really dominate headlines. Well, fast forward to just recent times, and what we've seen was that Al-Qaeda and Al-Nusra spawned the ISIL, the Islamic State in Iraq and the Levant, which became just the Islamic State when they sought to declare, or have declared, a caliphate, the group known more in that region as Daesh, and we have seen the atrocities committed by them, not just in this case against Christians, but against Yazidis, against Shia Muslims, against Kurds throughout that region. In particular, the town of Mosul, we have seen their incredible atrocities where some 150,000 people have had to flee that town. They were given the choice, this is the Christian community who were given the choice of converting to Islam, of paying a special tax and living in a state called Dimitude, which is a second-class citizen, or many were beheaded or crucified, men, women and children, by Daesh in that situation. We have subsequently seen the imposition of the rule of law as Daesh has implemented their Sharia law in that place, not just in Mosul, but a number of other towns. And we've seen refugees from the Yazidi population and the Christian population and Shias fleeing into neighbouring countries. I particularly want to highlight tonight the plight of not only the refugees, and we have a natural empathy and sympathy for them, but I want to highlight the role that neighbouring governments in Jordan, Lebanon and Turkey play in providing facilities and support for overwhelmingly large numbers of people. Focusing just for the moment on the Christian refugees, though, one of the things that is a highlight or a particular focus is that many of the official United Nations sponsored camps, which are being hosted by these governments, are not actually housing and supporting many of the Christian population. Because of the extreme sectarian nature of the violence that has occurred, many of these people have chosen instead to be supported directly by the Christian population living in Turkey and particularly in Lebanon. What that means is that not only does the government have a huge burden, and often that is supported in a large part by the United Nations, but the Christian populations there, the Catholic and the Orthodox populations, are shouldering a large burden with tens of thousands of people who have literally fled for their lives, arrived with nothing, and are now seeking that support from the communities in those nations. Many people I've spoken to in the public have asked about what Australians can do to support, and I would refer them to the various organisations, Caritas, World Vision, the various Orthodox churches which have representatives here in Australia who provide means to support not only the refugees but also the communities who are hosting and supporting them in those nations. Awareness is really important. As I said back in March, there were a lot of dreadful things happening and people weren't aware of, and even today many Australians are not aware of the extent of the atrocities that are occurring over there. And so I want to draw the attention of the Senate to an initiative which is being held this coming weekend in Australia called Solidarity Sunday, where churches from around Australia have agreed to hold awareness days for their communities, not only their congregations but their communities, to raise awareness of what is happening to these communities overseas, the Christians, the Yazidis and even other Shia Muslims. The Australian Christian Lobby is one of the organisers, but it is supported by a large number of churches: the Anglican Church, various Orthodox churches, the Australian Christian churches, the Baptist Union, the Catholic Archdiocese of Sydney, C3 churches, Coptic Orthodox churches, the International Network of Churches, Life Ministry Centres, Lutheran churches, Presbyterian, Salvation Army, Seventh-day Adventists, Syrian Orthodox, Open Doors, the Barnabas Fund, Voice of the Martyrs and Christian Faith and Freedom, just to name a few. At the moment there are some 600 churches engaged. The ACL are providing information packs for those who wish to register and receive that information, but I would encourage people to take part in this, because as global citizens we cannot afford to close our eyes to things that are occurring overseas that so directly affect the human rights of fellow citizens. We heard just recently from an eminent Australian, Michael Kirby, who was reporting on the abuses that are occurring in North Korea at the moment. And one of the points he makes is that in the 1930s, when people looked at the rise of the Nazi regime, there were warning signs, but the world did not act until it was too late. Here again we see not only just warning signs, but we see gross abuses against a range of people in one region. And so the world really does need to take notice, to raise awareness, so that we can unite to support, we can give these people hope that they are not forgotten, but equally importantly we can take the steps that we need to find out the causes of the ideology that has spawned the kind of abhorrent violence we see, and to make sure that people of all communities and all faiths can work together to eliminate those elements of ideology that have led to that kind of action, so that we can not only make our community here in Australia safer, but that we can play our part in making the world a safer place for all people. And so that Article 18 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is about the freedom of belief, freedom of conscience, belief and religion, or indeed the freedom to not have a religion, is respected by all authorities around the world.